As always, I love the just completely transparent intellectual honesty. I know that I can always count on you for that, Jake. You'll always give me the straight dope.
Good. I'm glad.
Eric Rosen here. Welcome back to Cannabis Matters. And I'm here with Jake Bullock, CEO and co-founder of Cann. Jake, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm really curious to hear your perspective in particular on just how cannabis looks differently from, today compared to 12 months ago and 18 months ago, given your and Cann's tenure in the space.
Yeah, it's a really interesting evolution. I mean, we started Cann over 5 years ago. This was very much into the adult use recreational marijuana movement, which was happening. I'd grown up in Colorado, so it happened in Colorado first, and then expanded to Oregon and Washington, and had come to California. And folks were sort of telling us at the time, it might be too late. You might have missed it, right? We've got all these gummy products, and we've got these, sort of consumers are coming into dispensaries in large numbers, and there were all these kind of interesting vape products on the market, and it sort of felt like, okay, yeah, we know how consumers want to consume these products. And it's amazing to think that, even just over those 5 years, how much has changed, how little has stayed the same, or how much has stayed the same as well, right? We're still kind of locked in this box of how do consumers want to consume these products? As dispensaries have rolled out across different states, no one really expected it to continue to be this state by state of an approach. Most people would have bet 5 years ago that by now you would have had some sort of federal regulatory action in the space. And that hasn't happened, right? And as a result, we live in this kind of state by state world. And most states have struggled to figure out what good policy is in the space. And as a result, you have, unique features in each of these markets, and they don't work well together. There's obviously really, really robust illicit markets in a number of states, both in California, where we started, New York, which we thought, maybe if you would ask me a year or two ago, would be one of our biggest markets. It's not even a market, at least not in a licensed legal way. And so, it's pretty amazing to think about how these challenges that everyone sort of foresaw 5 years ago haven't been resolved in any meaningful way, at least not on the adult use dispensaries side of things. And as a result, I think you're seeing a lot of brands have exited, have gone under. Even some retail chains that were fairly popular, should exist, got a lot of the things that they needed to get right. Weren't able to survive. And then we also have a global sort of economic cycle that intersected with all of this. And so I think one of the biggest things that's different now than 18 months ago, say, is it's just really hard to get capital. People are not putting money into the space. And it's not just related to the cannabis side of the industry. It's pretty broad. I think if you don't have solid unit economics, generating cash as a business, investors are much less interested in funding losses than they were a couple of years ago.
I love that you brought up unit economics. And I'm curious how, when you compare and contrast we'll call it the traditional cannabis market, which is funny to use the word traditional with respect to metric.
Right.
When we compare and contrast the traditional cannabis market with the hemp-derived product set that we're seeing kind of across the board, A, how are you thinking about it? And B, is it a fast fad or is it here to stay?
Yeah, it's definitely here to stay. It's interesting. I mentioned in talking about the cannabis dispensary channel, this lack of federal action. There's a similar sort of rhyme or theme to what's happening on the hemp side, but it's inverted. So there's also a lack of federal action. The FDA should be regulating these products, and they're not. They can today. They'll tell you they can't, but they can. But the difference is that something actually has to be done to stop it, as opposed to what we see on the marijuana side, which is, well, we need some sort of legalization, we need some sort of legislation to make things better. On the hemp side, it's the other way around. There needs to be some legislation to stop what's happening. So that's in part why I think it's here to stay. The other reasons why I think it's here to stay are the dynamics are much different, right? One of the early premises of how states like Colorado, California, and others rolled out adult use cannabis legalization regulatory frameworks was, we are creating this sort of shadow retail environment, shadow industry entirely. You're going to make these products in manufactured ways. You're going to grow them in a licensed grow facilities. You're going to distribute them all through the licensed supply chain, including down to the retailer, which at least in some states, they had medical retailers they could convert over. But for the most part, these are all net new builds, new stores, new distribution warehouses, new trucks, new manufacturing, new grow. That all had to be the case for you to be compliant in this system. That was a really, really bad idea. I think not a lot of people talk about how bad of an idea that was, but it was a really bad idea. Now, the reason it happened was because there was a lot of trepidation about legalizing marijuana. People didn't want to do it. And so the idea was, well, let's keep it really separate and really regulated, and let's milk it for as much tax dollars as possible, and we'll get people comfortable with the idea. That's not how industry works. Industry needs to have a little bit more room to wiggle around asset and capital purchases, right? It needs more room to wiggle around things like taxes. These environments that are so highly regulated and highly taxed can't build businesses that make any sense. Hemp on the opposite side of that, right? Because what it's proposing is something radical and different. It's, well, why don't we use the existing infrastructure? Why don't we use the trucks and the retailers that exist already? Why don't we sell the drinks where drinks are sold? And why don't we sell the snacks where snacks are sold? And allow manufacturers to make both. Whether if you're a craft beer manufacturer in Minnesota, you can make your craft beer products and you can make hemp THC products. And in doing so, it is much more likely to be a successful category, much more likely that businesses can be built in that environment. And so I think that's the real reason why it's not a fad and it's here to stay. Now, it only really works with the low potency products. I think the problem, what you run into is you should not be having a 100 milligram pack of gummies available for sale in an existing retailer. That doesn't make any sense. That's much more akin to prescription drugs behind the counter. You need a prescription or you need some sort of ID regulation. It requires some conversation, like when you get your prescription filled. It's like, do you want to talk with a pharmacist? Like, you should be talking to somebody before you walk out of a store with 100 milligrams of THC. That's my view. But 10, 2, maybe not. Maybe we can trust consumers to figure that out on their own.
What are you seeing these days with respect to consumer trends, cannabis beverages, and is there anything that you kind of expected to see that you're seeing? And on the other hand, is there anything that you're seeing that's really surprising you?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I had a similar experience at a beauty conference last week where everyone's talking about that demographic 18 to 25, and they do all this purchasing, and it's really where you get you establish a brand and a consumer sort of pattern. And someone got on the stage and said, 18 to 25, ask my 13-year-old. If you want to know what's cool, ask the 13-year-olds. And I think there's something there about we want to look to the younger generations to understand trends, because we're already too baked in our behavior patterns as we get older. And for products like ours, that really starts with legal drinking age, so 21. But that's relatively young for how we think about social beverage products. And every study that we see that has come out in the last couple of years is showing that on the whole, people are drinking less alcohol. The younger you are, the less you're drinking. And it interestingly is really hitting beer. That's a trend that we pay a lot of attention to because we're not entirely sure why that's happening. I think that a lot of what we've seen with hard seltzers and ready to drink canned cocktail products, or sort of liquor infused canned products are potentially eating away at beer because folks are trading over to those, and they don't have the same sort of gender overlay that folks has. Used to get, let's get beer for the guys and wine for the girls. Like, that doesn't really exist in the generations that are coming up. It's like, great, we'll get high noons for everyone. And so I think those things are really interesting trends. We're seeing young people, they don't feel like they have to drink alcohol, which is a really strong psychographic. I don't know if it's because of COVID disruptions on university campuses, if it's because this is the first generation that has gone through the legal drinking age transition in environments where things like cannabis products are available. Other things are more available, right? More widely available. For example, psilocybin, Adderall, I always point to because I think this is not a sober generation that's emerging. It's very much a tox on generation, but it's a tox on with choice. And I think cannabis is a big part of the choice that the various arrows in the quiver of a young person today. It's a real one. In some cases, we may see it be bigger than alcohol. And so I think those are the major trends that we're seeing with young folks. I don't know if I can explain exactly why they're happening, but they're definitely happening.
How do you feel about the shopping experience fundamentally changing from the dispensary model where you've got to show your ID to get in, and there's all these different age gating, and it's almost like a TSA experience versus Total Wine or Air One?
Right. Yeah, it's different. I mean, it's interesting because we spent a lot of time, because we started in dispensaries, and so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get somebody that walks into a dispensary to buy our products. So we were pretty good at that. I mean, considering we were laughed out of dispensary meetings in the early days because they were saying, well, who would want a 2 milligram THC product? It didn't make any sense to the sort of average person going into a dispensary, or the average, dispensary manager or bud tender there in that store. And what we found is that we were both a little bit right. On one hand, there were people that were interested in 2 milligram products walking through that door. Maybe they didn't fully know it yet, or there was a hesitancy around it that we were able to step into and say, oh yeah, well, you definitely don't want the 100 milligram chocolate bar. Try this first. And we also were able to find people that weren't the primary customer, that would walk into stores and would see our product and say, that will be perfect for my insert, significant other, parent, friend, somebody who they knew to not be a really high tolerance THC consumer, but also is like, they should really be mixing cannabis into their lives. Like either they're drinking too much alcohol, or they're too stressed, or they're something, right? And so we were able to really identify those folks that were not the primary purchaser, but would be the consumer of the product. Those things really helped us in dispensaries. To your point, at Total Wine, it's completely different because we're sitting alongside alcohol products that are like non-alcoholic beers, non-alcoholic cocktail products, and the consumer sitting there in the aisle looking at all the possible choices for what they're going to drink on a Friday night. And it's not about whether they're drinking or smoking or this or that. It's what kind of experience do I want to have this evening? What do I want to share with friends? What do I want to have with my partner when I get home? And that is really interesting, because what you'd expect there is people are making that trade-off live in terms of, well, do I want alcohol or not? Most of them choose both, which is really interesting. And so that's not an opportunity. That's not something you can do in a dispensary, right? We're not walking out of a dispensary door with a 6-pack of beer or a 6-pack of, High Noon, the RTD cocktail product, and a 6-pack of Cann. But that is happening here. And it's also why we started this company. When we really got going, the whole idea was we believe that these products should be at every social occasion. They should be an option. That doesn't mean they're going to replace alcohol entirely. Our best consumers drink a lot of alcohol, maybe too much, some would say. We bring them back to average. And so, I think there's also a question of like, what is the public health and public safety benefits of having these options? It can't be worse. It has to be the case that it will be better.
You ready for a hot take? Can I ask you a tough question?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the entourage effect. How are we thinking about the entourage effect with respect to ingestion? Because you see a lot of products that are labeled as, and these are edibles, gummies, beverages, single source, single strain, terpene specific. And I ask myself the question, how much does that matter with respect to impact on experience versus vaping, smoking, and the typical ways that we think about the entourage effect?
It's a really good question. I mean, I don't know this for sure, and not to belabor the point, but no one really knows it. And it's because of the total dearth of research in this space, because of the prohibition by the federal government on looking into anything other than the harms. And so we should have a whole body but thankfully we have the anecdotal, sort of body. And my sense from that and experiencing and talking with folks is that so much of these, particularly the cannabinoids, which would work on our endocannabinoid system, set and setting really matters. The milieu, right? Like little things, but important things like the environment you're in, who you're with, the music, of course, the aromatic profile, the actual terpenes, the flavonoids, these things that we know work together in any type of experience, let alone a smoking or a cannabis one more broadly. And so I think those things all end up mattering. My sense is that the entourage effect is really something unique to smoking. Maybe you can recreate it with vape. Maybe there's someone's going to figure it out with a science research standpoint how you can do this with ingestible products. But for the most part, I think that is a unique feature of an inhalation experience that's really, really difficult to capture in these ingestible products, in part because we want to control the ingestible product to be consistent from experience to experience. So every can is a stand, whether you buy it in Minneapolis or you buy it in Los Angeles. And the best way to do that is to remove all of the the non sort of active ingredients. So we focus our active ingredient on THC and CBD. Now we think a lot about using them in proportion, and we have a 2-to-1 ratio, which we're really big believers in as a social ratio. But we're trying to reconstruct that to some degree. And then we do introduce terpenes and flavonoids. We do that through our juices and natural flavor. And so there's interesting, like, we were taking the lemon and we're taking the lavender, which share a lot of overlap, right? We're taking grapefruit and rosemary, which share a lot of overlap, that also with cannabis as well. And so we're kind of recreating it in that sense. It's more about a flavor experience than it is about that sort of immediate, instant experience you would get from inhaling products. So I do think it's different in that way, but it's not totally cordoned off from an experience. I just add all the other things matter too. What's the music? Where are you sitting? Who's around you? What are those factors?
Yeah, for sure. Are you more bullish on premise or off premise from a growth standpoint?
It's a good question. I mean, most consumption of alcohol happens in people's homes. And so we kind of think that that's where this ends up. It will look a lot like alcohol. Now, that doesn't mean there's not a lot of on-premise consumption. There is, but that sort of comes later for this category, I think. We want it to happen faster because it's a great place to drive trial. I mean, we're ultimately expecting people to buy packs of our products because that's how it's currently sold in places like Total Wine, and also in dispensaries. But people don't really go in and buy a single beer. That's not really the thing that happens in a Total Wine or even in grocery. And so we're optimistic that on-premise can be a real unlock for growth. We mentioned the younger folks. If you were looking at any of this data at concessions, at events, and particularly at concerts, which cater to younger people, artists which are more popular with younger people, they're showing up. They're not buying any alcohol. And so a lot of the live music business depends on those alcohol margin dollars that are no longer there for some of these shows. And so that's another sort of existential risk that goes beyond just the alcohol companies, but goes now to entertainment. And how do we think about providing options to young people that they actually want and will consume and purchase on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, at a concert in a city across the U.S. So I think there's a lot of opportunity on-premise. I think it comes second. We got to sort of figure out how this market exists in retail and in states and have some continuity there, but it's coming.
Well, Jake, ForceBrands is a huge fan of Cann, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us today and be on the Cannabis Matters program.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
You're very welcome. Have a wonderful day.